All right, good morning, everybody. I'm sorry to have missed last week. Was anyone here to be with Lindsay Hansen? I heard it was a pretty great experience. Yeah, so are we all going to move around in our pews now, right? Yeah. So I knew her as a Young Hope student. Maybe Kathy shared that. I'm so happy to have her back here. I'm just going to go ahead and start speaking, because we've got a bunch of things that we want to try to do this morning. We'll see how many we get through. There's going to be a number of other people participating this morning, and I'm going to do a little bit of setup, and then there's going to be a bunch of show and tell. Which, who doesn't like show and tell? And so because of that, we'll see how our timing goes, and I hope that through show and tell, that also might prompt you to want to share some experiences. So we will also try to bake in a little time at the end so that we can interact with each other even more. And honestly, because I heard that Lindsay was so interactive last week, I wanted to make this a little bit more participatory. So I'm going to ask a few questions here at the beginning, and these are actually questions meant to be answered. They're not just throwing them out there. We want to explore today how art can speak to us, exploring faith and spirituality and art. And before we get to the ways that it has spoken individually to the people who are going to do show and tell, I wanted to just do a little bit of setup about how I think about art and one of the functions of art, so to speak. And I wanted to use something that I think will resonate with our congregation, which is I actually want to talk about reading. Because we got a lot of readers in this church. And so I think it's an easier access point for some of us. So let me ask you this question. It's not rhetorical. Tell me, when you think about reading, what is reading good for? What are the functions and the goodness that comes through reading? And Nella's got a microphone if you want to raise your hand and jump in there. Why do we read? What's it good for?
I remember the saying when I was teaching, I put up a bulletin board that said it's a window and a mirror. So it tells about yourself and it tells about other people. It gives you insight into both of those things.
I love it. It's a window and a mirror. It tells you about yourself and about other people. That's amazing. Don't let that great answer intimidate you. What are other things what is reading good for?
It's a way to connect with generations past.
Great. A way to generations past. Who else? Entertainment, right? Sometimes it's just for pleasure, right? Reading's for pleasure. Information. Yeah, reading gives us information. Anything else? Inspiration. Thank you. You have to participate, or I'll be talking to you afterwards. So those are good. I would add in, helps us understand things that we don't know about. That can be not just information, but a deeper sort of understanding. I'm reading a book right now. That's going to be the big read book next year, which I don't know if it's announced, so I can't tell you what it is. But it's helping me understand some other cultures that I don't know. And then also, I think something that works in today for some of us will be, it elicits emotional response. It helps us, that's a little bit the mirror in the image, right? That we can understand our own emotional response to things as well as others. So let me just say that I think all of the things that we say about reading are true about art. One of the things that I'm sure I've talked about here, but I will talk about again because it's sort of one of my main topics, really is visual literacy. We are a highly visually literate society. We just don't always acknowledge it. I often like to just pull out a cell phone and point to all the pictures, the icons, which I don't love that term, sitting in a church, but the icons on our phones that are little pictures that may have little writing under it. I don't know about you, but I can't read the little writing. But I don't need the little writing because the picture helps me navigate my phone. Pictures help us move through the world. We are a visually literate society. And then art can help us move even more deeply through visual stimuli. And so I like to say that we read art. We read art. So let's talk, we just talked about reading. I'm going to do a little bit of personal show and tell with just maybe 4 slides of my personal artwork, again for some participation here, to get us warmed up on sort of different ways we might read. So here's one just for pleasure. This is a painting called Two Can Play at That Game. It's part of a larger series, but let's see what you can read, specifically word plays. What are some word plays that you see going on with this painting, Two Can Play at That Game? What did it say again? So we see toucans. Toucans play at that game. What else? You see two cans. You know what kind of cans those are? Guinness, thank you. My friend from Boston's here, he was all over that. And for a follow-up question, why would I choose Guinness cans in a painting like this? Anyone? Next time you're in an Irish pub, look at the posters on the wall. In the 1940s and 50s especially, Guinness, for whatever reason, chose to use toucans as their mascot, and they would balance pints of Guinness on their bills. So you will see those posters everywhere you go now. So that's a little extra credit for you. What other twos do you see, or toucans? Cards, yeah, they're playing a game. There's deuces in there. Pears, thank you. It's a pear tree. Grown freely. There's one more I think you're missing. Yeah, we're in a tutu. Yeah. So you just read in a tutu. The one toucan's wearing a tutu. So you just read all sorts of things there, and that was mainly for pleasure, right? But information, some joy hopefully was expressed through a picture. I'm starting on a new series of paintings looking at threats to biodiversity. And I will certainly be back to talk about this sometime in the future, because I believe because I do this, it grows out of my belief that as Christians, we're meant to care for God's creation. But each of the paintings in the series have to do with one of those threats. So let me see if this one's communicated. What do you think this threat is? This is a diptych. The one on the left is called Polar Bear in a Snowstorm, 1975. Remember when you used to do that as a kid? So I was a kid in 1975, so that's Polar Bear in a Snowstorm, 1975. The one on the right is Polar Bear in a Snowstorm, 2025. Yeah, so climate change, global warming, right? So that's what I'm hoping to communicate through that. Also, if you look really carefully in the one on the right, there's a Coke can or a Coke bottle in the background, because advertising has told me that polar bears drink Coca-Cola. Anyway, so still whimsical, but hopefully communicating, helping us read other more important issues. Okay, now let's move on to some biblical art. I'm going to share 2 of the same passage, but 2 different ways that I depicted it, that now get us into our Lenten season and specifically into Holy Week. So I have painted crucifixion a number of times, and I wonder if anyone reads anything into this image, that anything jumps out to them as the way it speaks to you, or something that you see, that either the way I crafted it, or things that you see tucked in there. Yeah, back there. What is it? There's a skull, yeah. So you can see the skull hidden in there. Anything else? Yeah, darkness. So this was a really visceral experience for me to create this painting. I had painted most of it, and I took my a pencil laying nearby, which there is some pencil in my work sometimes, but I'm mainly a painter. And I just started to scribble. And you see the sort of cloud of darkness there? It was a really almost uncalculated response that I was caught up in the reading of the passage. Also, difficult to see, but if you follow Jesus, there's red coming down from him, and if you look really carefully, there's a cup and bread and stones. The Last Supper is depicted really loosely in there, but it might be hard to see from this distance. And then here's another version I did of it. Anything that you read into this image. Again, the skull, you might see. Yeah, thank you. It's ladder. So it's really, I'm seeing that it's much harder to see on the wall than it is in person. But there's a ladder going up to Jesus, and it keeps on going in a line of people, right? Just thinking about, this is for the gospel series of paintings I did over the last couple years, and I was looking at the different gospels. In the Gospel of Luke, I have all high places and flat places I want to help people think about this justice that Luke examines in his Gospels. And so I always make sure to have a flat place where some of the work is happening. Anyway, so we explore images with the hopes, or artists have images with the hopes of communicating something. We want you to read into them. We want you to get something from them. Information, emotion, new thoughts. And these can be helpful for us in our faith. That's my humble suggestion to you. Again, I'm in safe space here. We're in a church that embraces the arts, and so I'm always happy to have these conversations here. I have spoken at churches where a presentation like this is more of an argument being made than just a conversation to have. It's very curious walking into those settings. Art can be helpful to us in this setting. Sidebar though, I was talking to Nella in preparation for this, and she very smartly and rationally laid out in her good Dutch way, straightforward as she is, that is it always helpful? Is what's being communicated especially in biblically specific art, is it always helpful? No, it's not, right? I mean, I love to make jokes about Malibu Jesus. Have you heard, again, forgive me if I've shared this one before, but Malibu Jesus, you know, brown-haired, blue-eyed, sparkly-eyed Jesus that looks like he's been surfing. It's a dude from California, he's just been surfing. I wish I had longer hair so I could really do the thing, right? Malibu Jesus. Is it helpful when Jesus has blue eyes and looks like he's from California? I don't know. Maybe there's some helpful things that can be communicated there, but there's also troubling things. Also, there become these things that get worked into our almost iconography that just become taken as fact because of the pictures. And in fact, they're not historically or biblically correct. One of the easiest places to go for that Nella reminded me of, is the Nativity, right? First of all, way too many people show up at the Nativity in a lot of scenes, right? You got the wise men showing up about 2 years too early, the little drummer boy, right? They're showing up in the pictures. But even the way that the manger and the whole scene is expressed, it's often in a distant place, set apart from everything else, when in fact, historians tell us that the space was likely the lower layer of the home where the family was, where the animals were, but a possibly more likely scenario for that evening was family members coming and going up and down the ladder, down where the animals were, down where Mary was. They weren't abandoned. They were surrounded by community in a home, just not in the main part of the house because there wasn't room. But we gather things from that sort of information that may or may not be helpful. Nella, you had a couple others that you shared. What are some other ones that you said that maybe we often depict that are not accurate, for instance? If I can put you on the spot.
Actually, the one that I didn't mention, but that came to mind because you were talking about the Nativity, is that I've forgotten the century in the Middle Ages, that Saint Bridget had a vision of the birth of Christ, and in that vision she was quite graphic about it. The infant is lying in her vision on the ground, still stark naked. Well, she was so influential that a lot of artists began to portray this little baby lying, naked on the ground, probably shivering away. But it was, so inaccurate in terms of what the Gospels say about this.
Yeah, thanks. And we could dig into more of those, but it's just, I think, important to at least make the side note. Even as I strongly make the case for how art can lend itself to the depth of our spirituality, it is also important to know, just like when we're reading anything, we don't just read with a completely open mind with no filters, right? That gets you to the wrong parts of the internet, right? That gets you on the clicks on the Facebook. That looks like an interesting news story, and next thing you know, you're in QAnon. Right? So we have to be careful. We have to be discerning readers. So that the same is true for art. So that's the sidebar that I thought I was nudged by Nella to. I thought, yeah, that's really important to say, that we really do need to be discerning readers. But the beauty of art, the beauty of reading anything, is it provides opportunity for engagement. Even if it's bad art or art we don't care for, we can still have a good conversation about it. Even a novel we don't care for, there might be value in that, to have that conversation. So the same is true with visual art. So that's my setup for our show and tell that's coming up. And I'll just do my show and tell first, and then we'll move to some other guests. And I want to do my show and tell leading off with the idea that, to me, I often respond to the art that moves me the most in faith situations tends to be an emotional response for me. I'm not a person that spends 10 hours in a museum. I tend to move pretty quickly through them. But I will tell you, the paintings that stop me in my tracks tend to be for emotional responses. I can remember being at the d'Orangerie in Paris. It's a smallish museum that has some of the Impressionist and Expressionist painters. And in the basement, there's one room. It's an oval room of Monet's water lilies. And it's so immersive. I remember stepping into it and tearing up. It was so overwhelmingly beautiful, just so beautiful. And I was taken, because of the way Monet creates light, to that moment in his garden. And it was so transporting to me. I was taken off guard. Or I can remember being in Spain and standing in front of Guernica by Picasso, which is a painting about the chaos and pain of war. And it was about a specific war, but it doesn't matter. It's the chaos and pain of war, and just being flattened by it, because it's massive and gray and strange. And interestingly, I was reading one of the Asher Lev books by Chaim Potok at the time, where Asher encounters that painting. I literally read that chapter the day before, not knowing that was coming. So it was an overwhelming experience to me. So I tend to respond, the paintings or artwork that catch me up are emotional ones. So I had such an experience at the Church of Nations on the Mount of Olives, Garden of Gethsemane, outside of Jerusalem. There's a church there built in the 1920s. Here's my little bit of Wikipedia knowledge for you. It was created by Antonio Barluzzi. He died in 1960, so he's not that old. But in the 1920s, this church was built, and Barluzzi was an Italian Franciscan monk and an architect. And they actually call him the architect of the Holy Land. And the list of churches and sites that he designed, if you ever go on a trip there, you will encounter his design while you are in that part of the world. And as is the case in that part of the world, they often build churches on sites that are historically thought to be accurate. Now, this is one of those situations where they're pretty close. I mean, that's the mount. We know it's there. Like you're within spitting distance or a rock throw distance of knowing this is where Jesus prayed. But now traditionally then there is the rock. This is the rock where he prayed. That's probably less accurate. But that's where they built the site. Here's the spot. And there's mosaics they designed up front. And here's my photo of the mosaics at the front of this church. And now I'm going to share with you Dave Krieger's photos because he got better shots than I did. Thank you, Dave. But what I'll set you up for is this is the night that Jesus prayed, and you can see him in the middle praying, and they have different pieces of his betrayal on either side. I'll give you these are mosaics. They're actually I'm going to jump ahead to the middle one. So here's the middle one. And here's the thing I want, I'm going to actually try and make this participation again. I reacted emotionally to this, surprisingly, because of something the artist did with the presentation here, specifically with the setting, the background. So let me see if anyone else has that sense. So here's Christ praying, and taking sort of the sense of his surroundings. Here he is receiving the kiss. And then here he is sort of responding to these people that have come to him. Is there anything that you notice about the way the artist is using nature? Yeah, thanks. Nathan nailed it. He saw it. It's the way he uses the trees. He's creating the mood by the way he uses the trees around him. So look at this. Here, it's peaceful but lonely, right? There's space. It's an empty space around him. And for me, it feels very lonely. Even though you have the Holy Spirit there, it's like he is sad. Here, there's an intimacy, it's a crowding as the betrayal happens. And then here is Jesus like, here I come, take me. He's showing his power. And look at, he's so powerful in the peaceful way he surrenders. But the trees respond. You see how they're bending away from his power? And that's just my response. So this is me reading the artwork. I didn't do any research past that. But this was these were the pieces that came to mind, mosaics, when we talked about doing this class, because I remember having that immediate response to the work. And again, it's enhanced by the fact that you're in the place. But I was really taken by it. It gave me an emotional reaction to the reading of that scripture. So that's how I read that artwork and how it helps me then picture and read that scripture when we get to Holy Week. Now I'm going to turn over the microphone to some other friends, and we're going to do some show and tell. So, next, Nathan, you're up. Just put the button. Shall I push it for you?
Yeah. Well, thanks for the chance to just share a piece of art with you guys today. I chose The Taking of Christ by Caravaggio, and from 1602, commissioned by the Roman nobleman Ciriaco Mattei, I believe is how you pronounce it. So let's just kind of identify who's in the painting. You've got St. John, Jesus, Judas, the three soldiers, and then a man holding a lantern on the far right. The main light source is coming from outside the painting, but this light source, the lesser light source, is the lantern held by the man. And it's actually a self-portrait of Caravaggio. He inserted himself into the painting. Also, presumably representing St. Peter, who would first betray Jesus by denying him and then go on to bring the light of Christ to the world. At least that's some interpretations. And then, okay, you can see how John is really freaking out is the technical word. No, but, and then the one on the right is really entering into the scene. So some writers say that the flight of the terrified John contrasts with the entrance of the artist, and scholars claim that Caravaggio is making the point that even a sinner 1,000 years after the resurrection has a better understanding of Christ than does his friend at that time, which I thought was interesting. A little history of the image. By the late 18th century, it was thought to have disappeared, and then it was unknown where it was for 200 years, and in 1990, it was discovered in the residence of a Jesuit, some Jesuits in Dublin, Ireland. Next, I have some comments from another art historian. Often in these paintings, Judas stands for also us, because we are all betrayers as well. And paintings of betrayal, such as the taking of Christ, were meant to be vehicles of self-scrutiny, mirrors of our own souls, and Christian viewers were to see their behavior reflected in that of Judas. This may provide some clue to the meaning of one of the more intriguing aspects of the painting, which is this highly polished mirror-like sleeve there in the middle. This writer suggests that he's inviting viewers to see themselves reflected in the behavior of Judas and then the soldiers. Another interesting part of the piece that people think is sort of unusual, and I do too, is how you have John's head really close to Jesus' head, almost melding together there. This scholar says, the twinning of Christ and John and the merging of the structure of their heads shows that the apostles, being the first bishops and the prototypes for the priesthood and thus the church which they propagated, are emanations of Christ himself. Interesting that the apparent age of the man with the lantern also kind of agrees with Caravaggio's 31 years when he painted the piece. So, the contrast, so these two figures bracket the scene, right? And the contrast in their attitudes is obvious. John is fleeing open-mouthed as if screaming in terror, and then Caravaggio is entering the scene. One tries to get away and not see, and the other to be there and to see. Paradoxically, the saint who is the friend of Christ wants to get away, while Caravaggio, who was actually, he was, I think, in prison for trying to kill somebody. You know, he was a brawler, yeah. So while Caravaggio, known by all, including himself, to be a great sinner, wants to be with Christ. A couple more comments. So, by formally pairing himself with John in the composition, people often talk about how John's face kind of lines up with Caravaggio's face. Caravaggio is asserting this role of the artist in the church's mission of spreading the faith. The dim lantern he holds is a simile for the effort of his imagination to recreate what he really can't see. And his light falls on his own right hand, the instrument of his art. And so another scholar suggests that the witnessing of Caravaggio holding the lantern is a recollection of the ideas that the artist's task is that of enlightenment. So those are a few of my comments. Does anyone else see something interesting that maybe I didn't mention? Yes. Yes, I think those are Jesus' hands. Who are those hands at the bottom of the painting is the question, which is interesting. And I thought about that too. Oh, I can look at here. The hands are Jesus' hands. I don't know why he's holding them that way. There's no, almost like in a prayer. I'm not sure. Are they what? I don't think so. I don't think there's anything in between the arms there. What's that? Submission, yeah, I think so, because he's not fighting, right? That makes sense. Another interesting thing to me is how Judas just seems to be kind of looking off in the distance. He's not really looking at Jesus. And another thing, I don't know if you can see right next to the face of Caravaggio there's that's the other soldier looking. Yeah. Well, that's all I have, guys. Thank you for letting me share.
This conversation takes me back to the Gazan Auditorium in the early 90s at Calvin University, God's chosen place of education in North America. The only difference here is that there's no old guy wearing purple leather pants, and that was my professor, Edgar Beauvais, who we all know his last name was Bouvier, right? We know that, but we allowed him to call himself Beauvais. We're looking at Edward Hopper. This is Cape Cod Evening. I grew up in the Wesleyan Arminian tradition of the church, and I really loved art and graphic design. These were things that motivated me as a young person. I remember driving and looking at the mobile Pegasus, thinking I could do better than that. As a teenager. So I really wanted to go to art school. My parents wanted me to go to Bible school in Medicine Hat, Alberta, of all places, right? Why do you want me to go there? By the way, that school's gone, so I made the right choice. And I had an uncle who worked at Zondervan at the time, and he said, send him to Calvin, I'll take care of him. Now, it was lost on me, this invitation to send me to Calvin. My grandfather was the general superintendent of the Evangelical Church of North America, in which I grew up. So I guess that was a tremendous leap of faith for the whole family. My thought was, great, I'll do a semester and transfer to the Art Institute of Chicago. You can't stop me. However, I met the Holy Spirit at Calvin, and my world was transformed by the worldview that belongs to God in that space. It was a new experience for me to be able to look at the world and know that Christ calls us in that crossroads with culture to reclaim things for Him. Very new thinking, completely gelled with that. So as an art student, as I began looking at work, Hopper became one of my guys. Hopper and Seurat. Why Hopper? Hopper had an amazing ability to look at America, the United States, through the lens of Paris, by the way, as everybody did at that point. But to take a look at Middle America and lay it bare in a way that has great overtones of spirituality. In other words, it's not just a portrait. It is an examination of what's going on. And this work starts to culminate. He's starting to really hit that when he introduces the figure into the composition. So this is a later composition, a mid-career composition of his. We've got two figures, a man and a woman, and a dog. Cape Cod evening. The first thing that we note is this doesn't feel very Cape Cod-y. I mean, it kind of does, because that's definitely the style of house that you would see on the Cape. But the grass is overgrown and dry, and there's this encroaching locust grove that is breaking some of our visual lines for whatever reason. And that locust grove grows continually darker. Meanwhile, center composition, we've got this dog who seems to be very alert and at attention. Something is making him tense, which makes us tense. What's going on? The woman and the man are not engaging. This is very typical of Hopper's work. You'll see that there's humanity, and yet they are not connecting in ways that are mystifying, and yet every day, why aren't they communicating? What's going on? Overall, there's a sense of foreboding and dread in something that seems like it should be coded as bucolic. What's happening? So as a young student, art student, I have a BFA in drawing and printmaking, but you'd never know it. Joel and I were just talking earlier. We kind of had like this flip-flop in college where he was going to go in, he was going to be the commercial artist, and came out the studio artist, and I went in as a studio artist, act of defiance, and came out owning a marketing firm with my wife. So, life is weird. As a young student, being able to look at this through the context of reclaiming the spheres. In other words, what is God telling me in this portrait of humanity? It just so happened that I started seeing this work in Lent all these years ago, and it has stuck with me. I mean, I think about this painting a lot. This is Lent in a lot of ways for me. This sense of foreboding that we are marching towards something awful and yet wonderful. And that exquisite tension that comes from the everyday life that we lead during this time. So just as the two of you pointed out, what's amazing about being a Calvinist to a certain degree is that we have this ability then to see deeper in the everyday and not just overlay faith on it, but to reclaim what was done through faith, through Jesus. So who's next? It has to be Nella. She's got like 40 slides, so we have a lot of work to do here. Thank you.
I do something here to the computer. Oh, is that all? Okay. Good. I don't have 40, but I have a few more than my predecessors here. This is a painting by Bellini, Giovanni Bellini, in the late 15th century. And I love the painting, and not just for the content, but also for how it is painted. But I want to juxtapose this painting to the ones of the crucifixion. This is really the Transfiguration Sunday is sort of the prelude to the Lent season. It is also a kind of a grand finale. Christ is transfigured. God is telling him, you are the Son I love. And he says also, to the people around Jesus at the Transfiguration, listen to him, so pay attention to him. What I want to point out in this painting is, of course, the cowering disciples. So the sort of the narrative, although it is not a really, a narrative exactly as it would have happened, because it's really not a mountain. Also, it's a beautiful Italian landscape. But what is interesting is, of course, the cowering disciples who really have no idea what is going on. This is a momentous image. They don't know what's going on. They misunderstand it totally. Also look at the people behind this event of Christ with Moses and Elijah on either side, is that life continues on. Look in the left. I have a close-up here. On the left you see a farmer or a shepherd with an animal. If we go back, then we see in the background two people talking. So life is going on, even though, good grief, this is Christ being transfigured. And I want to juxtapose this. I sort of zeroed in on the transfigured Christ, and next to that is a painting by Rembrandt, which is a kind of an iconic image of Christ, so it's not a narrative. But this is the moment I think he might be saying, God, why did you leave me? And I think it is such an enormous contrast to God saying, you are my son, and then Christ saying, I'm alone, you left me. Sort of the anguish shout that is uttered by Christ. I also have an etching. This would be then more of a narrative-like scene of Christ, but there are some similarities to it too. Look at the kind of the supernatural light, as it were, that is shining on this scene of the crucified Christ. You see people just doing their own thing, just like they did in the Bellini painting. They're talking to each other on the left side, or two people leaving. You see a John standing there with his hands in his hair, like, this is horrible thing. And then the centurion is kneeling on his feet, by saying, you are God, right? Which is interesting when you compare this now to, here you see him a little closer up. And this is another state of the same etching. There are actually 5 different states that Rembrandt keeps reworking. And this is the darkness, the encroaching darkness that is coming. So the light, in a sense, that is shining on Christ, sort of like God's light, like the light that came at the Transfiguration. This is the moment of desolation for Christ. The darkness has come, and he feels that he is without God. So I think it's just really powerful comparisons, excuse me, between the two. So now we get, I have some other images here that I'll pass by, and Kathleen is going to say some about this painting of Rembrandt. I would have solicited some comments, but we are getting too late, so we better give Kathleen a chance.
Thank you. Can you hear me? This is by Rembrandt van Rijn, of course, whose dates are 1606 to 1669. It's usually called Descent from the Cross. And as Nella said, he depicted this scene in various media several times. I chose this one because I love Rembrandt, I love his earth colors, the russets and the browns, and I love the way he sheds radiance. Did I lose my picture? Yeah. Oh, what did I do? Oh, okay. I touched it.
No,
No.
this one.
Yeah, thank you. All right, thank you. Okay, I chose this one because I love Rembrandt. I love his earth colors, the russets and the browns, and I love the way he sheds radiance on the figures on his canvas, but always against a backdrop of mysterious darkness. The radiance seems to me like the radiance of firelight. It makes me remember the way I felt as a child when my father would take us into the brooder house to see the new chicks, a wondrous nativity distinguishable under the shine of the heat lamp. But in a more archetypal sense, it invokes the campfires around which ancient peoples gathered to call up the holy, the Mysterium Tremendum et Fascinans, of which Rudolf Otto wrote. Something momentous is to be beheld here, a secret of life and death and of the eternal. There is stillness in this painting too. It depicts a moment of profound grief, yet the sorrow is somber, inward, monumentalized in dignity. In the wisdom of art historian Simon Schama, what we see here is a perceptibly Calvinist response, no histrionics, but resignation before the ineluctable execution of God's will. Nor are the figures around the cross in any way classical in face or form. Instead, we see them as common, unbeautiful. Even the features of the Virgin Mary suggest the weary face of an aging peasant. The great English art historian Sir Kenneth Clark has written of what he considers Rembrandt's two deepest beliefs: the uniqueness of the individual and the humility of our mortal state. Which probably suggests another reason why I'm drawn to this picture, its insistence that we gaze upon a lifeless body, the final phase, or at least the penultimate one, of the incarnation of the Son of God made man. Our culture celebrates the naked human body in the vitality of life, in athletic competition, in sexual fulfillment. But the other, and arguably most intimate pole, the contemplation of the body in death, is more and more kept from us, as it was not in past times, when the final offices of love were the laying out of the deceased by those closest. The novelist D.H. Lawrence, a poet of the body in all its phases, if ever there was one, has a moving story called Odor of Chrysanthemums, a depiction of two women as they prepare the dead body of their son and husband. Again, we have the mystery of chiaroscuro, the flame of the candle against the darkness of night. The man's wife beholds him, Lawrence writes, in the naive dignity of death, and stands arrested in fear and respect. She saw him, how utterly inviolable he lay in himself. A terrible dread gripped her all the while, that he could be so heavy and inert, unresponsive, apart. And yet, in Rembrandt's painting, not apart, the majesty of the Redeemer is not absent from this picture, but it is humanized, made approachable by the last homely gestures, the lifting, the wrapping, the carrying to the tomb of those humble folk now left behind, left to clean up, to pay respects, to try to bring order, but then, alone at last, to ponder in their hearts.
I'm just going to suggest that you submit what you just said to the Reformed Journal for a Lenten reflection. Anyone else, right? For the, hey, I know we've hit our time. I'm going to go ahead and blame it that church ran long today. It was worth it, participating in the table. But that does take us out of our ability to show and tell with each other about experiences we've had. so you can continue to have those conversations with each other as we dismiss ourselves and enjoy just talking about maybe art that has spoken to you. What I loved about today was seeing 5 individuals sort of speaking out of the way they are. We read based through our own lenses, right? And I think we saw the lenses on display, and I think that's beautiful. It shows you the power of art, but also the power of community, that we all bring different perspectives to the things that we're reading and sharing. So thanks for joining.